Hi, this is Rahman Sheikh. Welcome to Fortnightly Railway Transportation Systems podcast. I am the host and railway systems specialist. This podcast is primarily focused on railway experts who have vast amount of experience and contributed greatly to this amazing industry. This is not a technical seminar but focuses on feel good stories, individual journeys, their success and failures, motivating younger generation to kickstart their career in railways and creating a sense of pride for the railway people who devoted their lives on the most environment friendly public transportation. On today's episode of Railway Transportation Systems, we are thrilled to welcome Val Matthews, co-founder and CEO of both Project Advisory Group and Project Connect Group. With over 20 years of experience in Australia's transport and infrastructure sectors, Val has been at the forefront of closing the digital divide between construction and other industries. His expertise spans project management, strategic planning, digital transformation, and business analytics, making him a key figure in modernizing PMO outcomes. As the host of the Project Chatter podcast and a thought leader in digital and project management, Val's insights will undoubtedly offer a unique perspective on how digital systems are revolutionizing the transportation industry. We are thrilled to dive into his journey, his experience in fusing technology and project management, and what the future holds for the transport sector. Hi Val, welcome to the pod.
Rahman, thank you very much for being very lovely towards me and helping me with my first podcast for the year. So it's great to be here.
So I think our audience also will be super happy to listen from you, as you are quite known in the industry, not just rail but various other industries, a very famous figure in Australia. Once again, welcome Val, and I'll start with my first question. You have worked in project management for over 2 decades now across various sectors, as I said, particularly in transport and infrastructure. What led you to focus on closing the digital divide in these industries?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's an interesting journey. I originally started off in the Navy, really getting into mechanical engineering and marine engineering. And I loved the idea of doing difficult things. I think this is the same for most engineers. We love to solve problems, yeah? And whilst that never left me, I guess my vocation has changed as I left the Navy and went into projects. I got a taste for really difficult projects, very big projects. And at the time, mega project was really a very rare word in Australia. So you're going back some time. Obviously, it's a common thing now to hear mega projects and maybe even giga projects. But when I was growing up, and a lot of the listeners would be the same, a mega project was very rare. So I landed on a few mega projects in my early career, mainly in the Navy and shipbuilding. We had some pretty big defense contracts at the time. And I've worked across 7 or 8 different sectors just to get a bit of a feel for different. But I had this conquest of just chasing very difficult projects. And Australia had a massive transportation infrastructure boom as I was kind of coming up through project management and project controls and PMO. And I ended up working on fascinating projects in the rail and road and airport infrastructure space because they are very, very complex. And there's a lot of complications and layers to those projects that I just absolutely loved. And not to mention, not just the technical parts of these projects, but the people that it brought together. Right? You just had these fascinating, very intelligent people, very passionate people, all trying to push towards the same goal, which is to deliver this thing that we're not sure how to deliver it because we've never done it before, which is also a very exciting part of working on mega projects. So that's kind of how I got into the transport space. And to me, I think the other thing is that I've always been a kind of a learned reader and discoverer. I'm always trying to learn new things and get my head around how it works and how I kind of can figure it out myself, I guess.
Great answer, Val. So as a co-founder of Project Advisory Group and Project Connect Group, how do you incorporate digital transformation and design thinking in your projects? And also, can you share a specific example where this approach led to a successful outcome so that our audience can learn?
Yeah, of course. I'll use a rail project as well if that helps. It actually started for me in NBN Co. So I used to be in the National Broadband Network organization, a government organization, to roll out the fiber network for Australia. And I had a really interesting role as national project manager. And they actually had in their kind of mission statement, if you like, or their purpose, is to close the digital divide, right? So that was their kind of premise for rolling out optic fiber, which was a great one because we all needed internet. And thank God we do, because we would be very stuck if we didn't have that across Australia now. Such an interesting project, such a vast kind of size. So I guess for Project Advisory Group, our whole premise is around making a difference on projects that matter. And we embed digital in everything we do. So we are kind of at the forefront of various proof of concepts, and we get very excited around AI. But I think the AI hyperbole is really a bit of a buzzword in the construction space, because construction tends to be a bit slower to adopt. It's a bit harder to adopt. It's not because they don't want to. It's generally because of the size of the projects that they're working on. That it means that there's a lot of considerations before just rolling out new technology or new advancement in the market. So construction is sometimes a bit slower to take on that advice. So we work in that space between translation and transformation. It's a very interesting space because you still need to have some technical understanding of how transport projects are delivered. But if you could give the client just a little bit more of what's possible, what's out there, how do I know I'm not missing out on something that would be really beneficial for me and my team? And there are a lot of new things happening, because the challenge a lot of clients get into, Hitman, is so many choices now. If you think about how software as a service has exploded and everyone's got a solution, almost too many solutions, and they're all trying to solve different problems, and they all may or may not talk to each other. So it can get very, very, very technical. And that sometimes means that people get a bit scared and a bit worried about implementing anything at all. And then you get this analysis paralysis. So we guide clients through that from a project advisory group perspective. And we've had some good runs in that space. As an example, the second part of your question around, winning outcomes, I think with
Yeah.
big projects, Metro Tunnel was a significant project in my career. I absolutely loved being on that project. Originally, we were brought in as part of Rail Projects Victoria, the client side of Metro Tunnel, to look at how can we understand or get some more confidence around the day one operation. So we have a big critical path. We have lots of delivery, lots of moving parts. Obviously, a big project, 12 plus billion. Are we going to hit day one, Val? And so my team came up with the first kind of integrated baseline review, which was more of an audit and a process rather than a technical solution. And that really helped give guidance, not just to the client, but also to the project teams as well, around what is good standing for a project delivery framework. How should we be delivering things that we've missed, maybe from a compliance or a standardization perspective. But it didn't get exciting until we started talking to the Alliance, actually within Rail Systems Alliance, which is one part of the Metro Tunnel project, about how can we visibly see project data better. And the challenge they had is, in an Alliance contract, everyone has their own proprietary systems. Everyone has their own data and their own reporting lines, but consolidating the data is very, very difficult. Even today, it's very, very difficult. And the Alliance contracts, unfortunately, don't make it easier. And it can sometimes be a little bit of a tense environment. But we had a great leadership team at the time who were very, very proactive around trying different things. And the ultimate goal was to be an informed decision maker, which I think most senior management and executives want the same thing. They want data quick and fast. They want it to be accurate, and they want to make decisions so they can move on, because they've got no time to really sit there and digest hundreds of PowerPoints or Excel spreadsheets. It was the first time that we designed something called a digital command center, and we worked with the team to come up with not just the name, but how we would use design thinking to get the teams involved. And there was, maybe 20 to 30 different vertical functions within that group. They all had their own different reporting requirements, and this came from top down. So we didn't want it just to be executive reporting. We kind of wanted to consolidate everything. We were the first to bring data scientists into a construction project of that size. So we had data scientists, we had about 8 of them. We partnered with Swinburne University to bring in the best minds, young minds that understood technology. And then we had the old guys like myself, trying to explain and teach them about projects. And it was great. So we had a big mock-up of this kind of digital command center sitting in one of the floors near the cafeteria, near the cafe area. And we would have these presentations and take teams through it. And it was a mock-up of what the dashboards might look like. And this is kind of early day Power BI and early day kind of integrations and automations from a transport perspective. And the response and the results was fantastic. Everyone was very proactive and were forthgiving and transparent in how they wanted the data to look. The end result and the outcome of that was the first digital command center for a rail project in Australia. It consolidated thousands of nodes, automated all their reporting at all levels, and it was all branded within one room. So we had 8 55-inch screens connected together with an infrared frame that went around it, so that when you touched it, because it was interactive, you could touch and drill down into the various reports and dashboards, whether you were engineering, whether you were design, installation, whether you were project management or health and safety. We had it all covered, which was absolutely phenomenal. even to this day, I use it as a great case study because, a lot of companies look for that. And I would call that just the fundamentals of project planning and reporting now. But, back then it was quite novel. It did win the Global Innovation Award, Project Controls Expo in the UK for 2022. So it sounds like not that far away, right? But it is quite far away. But the ultimate goal was that the teams could come in at one glance of the board, they could make decisions. And if they weren't sure, they did have the opportunity to dive down into it and drill down a bit deeper.
Great example, Val. Can you also let us know what was the key challenge in this, like integrating these digital solutions with traditional construction and infrastructure projects?
The biggest challenge, I used to think the challenge was tools, but it's usually people. People have there's a lot of unpacking around translations of what does good look like and how do we measure a KPI. And what happens in projects a lot is we're probably measuring the wrong things, not because we mean to, but because that's how it's been done. There was no challenge on that space. And what I mean by the wrong measurements, a lot of the time when we get reporting on a project that big, it's lagging indicators. And what I mean by that is it's kind of already happened. It's actual data, and actual data is useful. It gives you historical kind of benchmarks and you can look back, but it doesn't tell you how to correct something that's going wrong. You're kind of too late to the party. The party was at 7, you got there at 8. So what we wanted to do is implement better KPIs, leading indicators, things that we could see that were trending and tracing, but we had an opportunity to change. So that changed the dynamic between the alliance and the teams of how we would actually try and measure these things. And rather than just looking at lagging, we would look at leading indicators, say, okay, if this, and this happens, there's a high likelihood that this end result will be a negative lagging indicator. So that was an interesting kind of piece. The other element is the challenge we have with software providers in the time where software providers make their money by users, by subscriptions, by these contracts. And a lot of the time they don't allow other kind of systems or tools to integrate. So extracting information and extracting data at that size, at that volume, at that frequency, we were getting down from a monthly to a weekly cycle of frequency data. So that was the other challenge we had, was how do we get all this stuff pooled in one area where it was still secure? We still had some level of validation from a human, because I don't believe in full automation, not yet. And the third thing was maturity. Do we have enough confidence from some of these systems? For example, some of these reports from various departments would be Excel spreadsheets. If you're building effectively $1 million digital command center and just one update is going to be Excel, there's a chance it could be inaccurate. And a lot of the risk information coming up from the teams, whilst it was valuable, was on these Excels. So we actually made conditions and various kind of proof reading and validation rules within the algorithm to understand that if something was wrong, to push it back to the user. If something wasn't updated, to push that back or not update it. So we had some rules in place to stop kind of, I guess I would call it kind of hygiene around the data itself, so that we just didn't publish whatever came into the common data environment. So that were our kind of 3 major challenges putting this all together. And we had a very short time frame. So we built this entire thing end to end within 6 months. Right, man? Quite impressive, yeah.
It is, because you picked some key important challenges from the infrastructure projects, which even I see in my latest projects I am working. Thanks for sharing, Val. And you did touch about decision making, about the executives. So my next question is, how important is data-driven decision making in modern project management, particularly in our rail transport projects?
It's massive. It's massive because rail has a certain sequence of work, right? So it has to happen in a certain order. And the challenge is when we get to the software part. So let's say we're doing something similar to what we did with Metro or Suburban Rail Loop, in the sense that it's a CBTC or communication-based trade control system. There is an element that is without control, in a sense that it can only be tested once the train's ready, once the rail's ready. It's got to be tested on the network. And so your critical path is easy. It's almost always going to go through there, and it's always going to have rework. And so your biggest risk is the unknowns around how effective is your software installation, integration, and testing going to go. So when it comes to decisions before that impact that piece of work, they are fundamentally crucial. And what's funny to me, and this actually never actually made it to the digital command center for various reasons, but I suggested a decision log. And what the decision log was meant to do was be the knowledge base for every decision that was made was a critical decision. It was logged along with the digital command center reporting. So at the time you make a decision based on the data presented, in time you would be able to go back and say, was that the right decision? and you'd be able to determine whether or not the decisions you're making were effective or ineffective, and then make adjustments. And two things that kind of made everybody nervous came out. One of them was we would know by person, by individual, who was making effective decisions and who was not making effective decisions, which was a problem for privacy reasons and maybe for reputational reasons. And the second one is because it was an alliance, it would also put emphasis on the contractors who weren't performing or making poor decisions, maybe over more appropriate decisions. Well, I see that as a lessons learned rather than, naming and shaming anyone. But obviously there was some concerns around how we would shape decision logging in general. And I had a few podcasts actually where I talked to Dan Patterson about decision logs, and we thought it was a great idea, maybe anonymous to start with, but trending individual decisions over time, because they tend to be quick and fast, but no one records decisions. To this day, I don't know any project that does this.
Great. I believe with your company, like with this great multi-billion-dollar projects, you could actually come down and guide the project management team, especially in this digital decisions. And I see that you have a data science certificate from Harvard Business School online. Wow, congrats. How has your education in data science influenced your approach to project management?
Heaps. I mean, I think we underestimate what's possible with just a very little amount of effort in data. Data in itself is not necessarily important. We talk about data a lot, but it's actually information we're looking for. Data with meaning, right? Data with meaning is important. Yeah. And that's what information is. Can't use our sat nav without it, right? So if we want to know how to get from here to there, Google Maps is fantastic, but if it doesn't tell us turn left here and turn right, that we'll never make it to the destination. So we need meaning and context to data. Data in itself is it's quite simple. And the challenge I find is we start projects off on a wrong footing. And so when I realized how, through data science and all these courses and education that I've been through, you find how data should be structured before you even start. And what ends up happening on projects, unfortunately, is we start a project and then we start thinking about building these great ideas. And, projects do try and get themselves organized, but it tends to be once we're in execution or we're already kind of trying to deliver a project. And the biggest kind of challenge to that is you're trying to introduce change to maybe hundreds or thousands of staff members or project members. At the same time, they're trying to do their day job. And it makes it very frustrating, causes a lot of friction in the process. So my lessons learned there would be to kind of start early and do this kind of pre-launch or pre-start of the projects. Get your systems and all your tools in place and connected and integrated rather than waiting until you've started the project. Even till last week, I did a 6-week course with MIT on AI implementation for big projects. And, I think with the kind of world we're living in, on-demand certificates online are quite a good low-cost way of getting some of this knowledge across. It's not hard. It just takes a little bit of discipline. But I think if we don't do this, we're going to miss out on some great advantageous kind of advancements that are happening, right? We are looking at a very interesting framework of tools that are available to every user. And what I explain to projects that I work on, or at least advise to clients, is it's not about us as in consultants delivering a solution to you. It's more about each individual staff member or each individual project person could have a suite of tools that they access for their own personal benefit. Could be for productivity, efficiency, more effectiveness, transparency. You can set up your own little digital command center quite easily with zero cost, a very low learning curve. It's very, very low, maybe a couple of hours a week to get your head around it. And you would be so much, if we have to remove emails and Excel, wouldn't that be a great day for every project manager in the world,
I would, agree, 100%. And it's also a part of your continuous development as well. And with this technology in today's world, it's rapidly changing. So, one more question is, how do you see this PMOs evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, particularly in this transport sector? Because the reason I'm asking this is before I called you on my pod, I actually read a book on HBR guide for project management.
Nice.
And I've seen there are 7 types of project management. And when I try to relate with the transport project, I see waterfall project management is pretty close to it than other agile, PMP, and various other things. So to cut short, what do you see? Which project management is actually helpful for us to sit down and go through this certificate course or MBA for transport projects?
I think Elon said it best when he said there's too many MBAs in the world. I did do my MBA, and most of it was just validation rather than innovation or anything that would really help me change projects. But the simplest way to understand projects methods is that no method should be greater than any other. And I've been reading a lot about this project failure space. So there's a few people out there researching how projects fail. So the opposite of success, right? And that's a good way to think about projects is what should I learn so that I don't end up failing on a project or whatever capacity that is. Project planning seems to be the nuts and bolts of it, is that we put high expectations on project plans to be infallible, to be detailed to the nth degree for a 10-year program, and we expect no change. So we want to work in a isolated, in the vacuum of space, and we don't want anything to perturb it. And that's kind of what critical path is. It's to suggest that the logic that we had at the start of the project is going to be the same in the middle and at the end, which is just not true. So the investment in planning, I think, is going to be a massive shapeshifter in how we think about methodologies for project training. The other interesting part about that is if you look on the surface, and there's some research and some papers around what causes project failure. And according to the experts, it's project bias. It's human elements that actually cause the biggest problems in not delivering projects. It's not the project plan. It's not the costs. Obviously, they're factors, but it's actually how we influence by each other and how we make decisions based on the information. So those can't be avoided with new systems. I think that the thing that I'm thinking is going to happen, a few companies are already doing. These are the end plans and the nodes and links where they're looking at large language models and AI to kind of interpret benchmark data. I think when it comes to specialization, the AACE, in my personal opinion, has the best benchmarks and research on the project space in terms of planning and delivery. And one of the reasons why is they continue to work towards a standardization for the profession rather than just go out and say critical path or agile is the best methodology. And I've had a lot of discussions about certifications, and I'm a current fellow with the Association of Project Management. I think for a basis, they have a good base start, and it depends where you are in your career. But if you wanted to get really geeky on the technical elements, I would recommend AACE and their total cost management framework. And then if you're looking for different types of methodologies, you don't need to go far. I think Praxis has some great approaches to just everyday challenges. I've had a lot of these debates, usually over whiskey, right, man, around, what is the best method? And I come from defense where earned value is kind of the dominant king in a lot of the ways. And it's unfortunate that across sectors, we don't have a lot of this learning happening, where earned value would be fantastic on some parts of a rail project, for example, but not all parts, because once you get to software, you probably want to go to an iterative design type of arrangement like Agile, where you've got a little bit more control and there's iterative improvements and you can track it. But then probably by the end, when you get to commissioning or testing even, right, man, you're probably looking for a bit more of a critical path. So there is this kind of flavor that happens. But I think as long as everybody is facing the same way and they understand why they're implementing the methodology that they're using and they understand it, I think the biggest gap we have at the moment, Rahman, is a lot of the contracts write what the method, they stipulate what the methodology should be. They say critical path in the contract. And unfortunately, I think 9 times out of 10, other than maybe PMO, not many people know what that is. And sometimes even PMO doesn't. So it's a very dangerous space when there is probably no standard really in Australia at this point. I think there's a bit of a mixed bag. Yeah.
Wow, with great insights, Val. But quick question, I'm not a project manager. You have said that AICC. What is that stands for?
Sorry, say that again?
You did refer AICC. What is that?
Oh, AACE. It's the American Association of Cost Engineering. Hopefully I got that right.
Ah, okay.
So it's basically a standard that came up in the Americas, but it has a really unique function that most don't, which is these recommended practices. And so the community actually write recommended practices for each part of the AACE's kind of total cost management framework. And those recommended practices are then peer reviewed. So a bit like a scientific journal in a sense. They're peer reviewed and then they're published. But they could be anything. They could be based on basis of estimate or scheduling practices or cost engineering or cost takeoffs or whatever it could be. And they're very, very, very well written. And so I find, having been through all the different types of formats, I think they do a really, really good job.
Wow, great insights. Thanks for sharing that, Well, I would go back and try to have a read on that. And now on leadership. Having you worked many leadership roles across multiple organizations, including Thales and Maze, how do you foster a culture of innovation and digital adoption in teams that might be used to more traditional approaches?
Yeah, I think the best example of this is when I was in the UK, I was working with Transport for London. And one of the challenges, we had quite a tense relationship for various reasons. Things weren't getting delivered. So we reached out to our client side representative, PMO, and we sat down with them. We said, look, we want to change how we have this relationship. We actually want to go to an open plan type approach. We want to sit with you. We want to sit and go through all the deliverables we give you each month. And we want to work out what's valuable and what's not valuable. And so we kind of went to the school teacher with the red pen type thing and just started red penning all the things that they didn't actually see value in. We produced something like 180 reports each month for this. It was a £5 billion program of work for Transport for London's modernizing their 4 lines, just to give you context. And we had a team of about 52 PMO people working for me on the Talus side of the project. And so I had 52 people producing 180 reports every month. And that would take them a long time, lots of hours. They're working hard, very hard.
Yeah.
So I brought the team in and I brought their team and I said, look, do we enjoy the work that we're doing? And 90% of the team were like, well, not really. I want to see my kids and I want to get home once before it's dark and all of this stuff. I said, well, then let's not just kill ourselves. Let's try and work out a way that this will work. So we started whiteboarding and coming together with some new ideas. And that's when we used De Bono's 6 thinking hats. And Edward De Bono is an interesting guy. He's if you have not read any of his stuff, he's a bit of a lateral thinker, a bit like myself. I think I take a lot of inspiration from people who think a bit differently. And he would sit there, and the 6 thinking hats, just in a summary, is effectively different ways of looking at the same problem, but with a different kind of persona, if you like. So the hats represented the different personas, and you would challenge yourselves based on the hats. And you don't have to wear the hat; it's more of a metaphorical thing. But we would have everyone trained on the 6 thinking hats, and then we would go through the problems that we had every month, and we'd use the hats to look at the problem from different angles. Now we might do this automatically, and a lot of intelligent people do, but it just gave format for a large group of people, 50 plus people, to kind of think about things a little bit differently. And also what ends up happening out of that is you take a different perspective and you end up providing different solutions. And then we voted on the solutions. So that was quite innovative, I thought. And then I think in general on projects, just eliminating waste is just a fun exercise for everyone to do. So we used to do these things called retrospectives, where we would start, stop, and continue, And when we went through all the things that we did that were outside of the reporting realm, let's talk about planning, let's talk about cost engineering, let's talk about how we run meetings. We found that there was a lot of things that we were doing would just repeat with the same people, or they were in rooms where we didn't have any influence. So we started exiting ourselves, and we found we gained about 50% of our time back. And so the success measure is within 2 years, we went from 50 people in PMO to 8.
Amazing. So when you say that 6 hats, so I believe it's not just technical. Probably one hat is delivery, one is commercial, one is legal, one is regulatory, one is client side, one is contractor side. So are these the different hats of thinking?
No, they're more around actual thinking rather than roles. So you'd have a red hat for emotion, you have a yellow hat for benefits, you'd have a green hat for ideas, and a blue hat for planning. The one that everyone loves wearing though, Rahman, is the black hat, which is judgment. Because this is where your devil's advocates and the people who aren't on board, they love to be critical, and squash an idea. So they had a hat that they could wear, which made them feel important. So everyone could be critical together, which kind of then defeats the point of them being critical, because that's the reason they stand out. So part of my studies, I did do some study in business psychology as well. And I found wearing personas helped people kind of get out of their default state. Some people, you have surly people on projects or difficult people on projects. They're not difficult on purpose. I don't believe anyone goes out of bed to say, I'm going to ruin everyone's day today. I think they just have a certain way of looking at the world. So this way of thinking that Edward De Bono had come up with allows them to be themselves, but then try on different personas whilst being in, kind of a supportive environment, which is very different to how we'd usually look at a problem. You would just go with your own brain and you would just look at it the way you've always looked at it. And there's this concept around plasticity, right? That the brain is malleable. You can change your views just by thinking. So it's an instant thing. It's not a 10-hour thing. It's hey guys, this time we're going to look at it from a feeling perspective. How do we feel about this? This time we're going to look at it from a benefit perspective. What do we think the benefits of this solution are? And so it never really put anyone down in a position where they didn't feel they were adding value. And I think when you get project people coming together like that and they can feel that they're contributing, they get very excited and want to do it more. And
person, great insights. Well, so let's put your other hat. I know people know that you are a co-founder and a CEO. You are also a podcaster, so you're a host. The Project Chatter podcast covers many topics related to project management based on your discussions there. What recurring challenges do you see project managers facing today, especially in digital and transport sectors?
It's a great question. We've probably interviewed over 200 plus people and hundreds of hours, which has been a great opportunity. I've learned a lot from that podcast, and we've been doing it for 5 years. So the themes seem to be the same. Education seems to be a big challenge for people. And I don't blame any of the institutions or the organizations that are out there or universities. I think it's an element of self-service. So a lot of the vocations, and not just project management, they leave it up to others to decide what's important for their own careers. And so this is where we need to be a little bit different about it. We need to be self-empowering. And I think a lot of project managers go, right, a bit like engineering, here's my career pathway. The university will tell me what I need to learn, and that's all I need to do. But that's not actually how the world works in project management, because each project's slightly different. The demand is different, your client's different, the specifications are different, and the impacts are massive, right? If you make the wrong decision on projects, people can lose jobs, people can have accidents. There's a lot of pressure in those environments. So my view is that it should be self-empowering. You should decide which project areas you're not doing well in. And I think with project management, communication and negotiation always get left out. We talk about leadership, which has a component of these, but in actual fact, communication and negotiation are their own specializations. And that the people that have done the best that I've seen, so friends, mentors, colleagues in the project, are excellent communicators. They are very, very patient. They take the time to invest in people. That is missing in a lot of these project organizations. People aren't dealing well with pressure. And I feel like this is one of these roles where resilience is a really, really important skill set as well. And so we have these projects where everything's rush, rush, rush. And rather than building the resilience and building the communication platform to lift the people up behind them, they just become very, very reactive, if you like. And unfortunately, they don't learn skills in that space. They just become very unpopular people, if you ask me. And you end up losing your talent doing that kind of thing. So I think comms, resilience, and negotiation would be the areas that PPMs need to focus on.
Did you also cover in your podcast, how do you mitigate those? How do you build those skills?
Yeah, we talked about education a lot. We talked about online versus physical. We've talked about what's the best way to learn. There is an interesting debate in my mind about how much we actually have to know versus how much we have to do. If you talk about experience comes through pain and firsthand knowledge, right? The on-the-job training is the number one teacher. I mean, there's not much out there. One of my hobbies is martial arts, and so you can't learn martial arts by reading a book. It's one of those things that you have to get beaten up pretty much consistently every time you go in. What we're looking for is actually some of those battle scars, right? And how can we accelerate the speed in which we are put in uncomfortable situations so that our brain can remember? And I think that's the case is if we can be uncomfortable, then we can learn. But if we're just cruising along, and unfortunately, I think the challenge is with a lot of these projects is they're quite people heavy. We have these massive projects, and particularly government. I look at government projects a lot, and obviously we provide advice about how we can optimize. And the first thing I'll say is, well, you're too heavy. You've been carrying 50 roles when really you need 5. And it's an unfortunate situation because at some point they have to make the call, right? And then you have this issue where you're reducing the workload, but the workload should have never been there for 50 people in the first place. So I think we need to make sure that it's uncomfortable enough that people are stretched so they can learn in uncomfortable situations. And we need to make sure as well that we have a different format for education and that it's not always hidden behind paywalls. The other challenge that most project people that I speak to, at least on the podcast, is that if they want a certification, no problem. It's $3,000. If they want an MBA, no problem. It's X amount, right? So they are constantly, obviously, if you want to be a great person or a great operator or a great talent, they're expecting you to pay tens of thousands of dollars to do that. My view is you do not need to do that these days. You can access most of this stuff for free online. Even the Harvard, most of these courses during COVID opened up free courses. So one of them that's great for your listeners is IBM. So you can get a badge in pretty much anything technical in Google, IBM, Harvard, MIT. They are phenomenal resources, and I don't think you need the MBA, to be honest.
Amazing, Val. Thanks for sharing these valuable insights. Quick one is you're the Project Chatter podcast. How long? Let's talk about these numbers. When did you start and how many guests you had so far?
We started about 5 years. So just pre-COVID or just during COVID, I think we started. And it was between me and someone who used to work with me, Talis, in the UK. And so he was in the UK, a guy called Dale, my co-host, and I was in Australia at the time. So I just moved back from the UK. And he was absolutely fantastic. He was a great, articulate fellow, and he always has been. And he was kind of the counter to me. So I was a bit wild and fast paced and a bit crazy. And he was conservative and rather calm and very well paced. So we bounced each other quite well. And we actually never intended it to be a podcast. I think we originally intended it to be a way to deal with mental health and have someone to talk to about projects and have a bit of fun. And then maybe we'll bring some guests in and we'll talk.
Yeah.
And it kind of evolved. So I remember him and I used to sit in our cars, and we used to do it in our cars because we were embarrassed of doing it in the house, talking projects with our kids sleeping, because it'd be 6 a.m. for me and 9 p.m. for him or something. And I just remember those early days. And if you ever listen back to them, you'll hear like the way we used to speak versus the way we speak now has changed radically because of these projects and these people we've spoken to over the last few years. But it's also good, like you said at the start of this pod, it's given me access to speak to so many great, knowledgeable people in our field. There's so many people out there doing great stuff. And the hard thing is
Great.
we didn't realize until we started doing this that there were so many people that wanted to be connected and wanted to come on and share their points of view, which I think is fantastic. So kudos for you to doing this as well. It's really good.
Thanks, Val. And I think I agree, I concur with you. You and I started with the same intention to make people know what railway people do to this industry, because no one actually understands railway people. No one knew that there were some people even didn't know that engineering exists in rail, which is a key part. In this my journey, I met a lot of people. My networking has really gone up. And yeah, thanks for this podcast. And Val, before I let you go, my final question for you is, looking forward, what are the next big trends you predict in the fusion of digital technologies and transport project management? And how can the industry prepare for these changes?
Well, this is a good one because I just wrote a LinkedIn post that's getting a bit of fire at the moment around the decline in traditional consulting and how that is not a crisis, that it's a correction. I think we're going to see a massive redistribution of power back to the client. And what I mean by that is empowerment. So the client's going to have a lot more options other than going to expensive consultants and engineers and etc. They're going to be able to do a lot more with less. The price set now for technology is ridiculous. I mean, you think about how much things like ChatGPT and these various other AI agents will cost us versus hiring someone to give us the same information. There's going to be a natural tendency to move towards the cheaper option. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I think it's a good thing in experienced hands. I think it's a dangerous thing in non-experienced hands. I think it's like giving a baby a loaded gun. There are areas where obviously AI should not be playing in, and there should be policies and regulation, I think. But we're going to see a massive trend towards innovative companies and innovative ideas. All the things that you and I probably did with pencil and paper, back in the old days, is going to be completely revolutionized. And it may not even be something we see coming. We didn't realize these roles that we have today until they happened, right? Data science, I'd never even heard of until I saw it one day, data engineer, prompting engineering, like physical AI. These are interesting terminologies that will start to evolve into roles that people will then take. The thing I said on a panel a couple of weeks ago that was quite, I think, not controversial, but interesting was that how does everyone feel about having a workforce that isn't completely human? And I think we'll end up having is a subsidized workforce that isn't a physical person, but has the capacity to be one in the sense that can rationalize and do some executive tasks that we would usually give to someone within our team. Hey, John, can you go pick up this and do this and send that report to Simon? And that will be something that we can automate. And then my third big kind of read on the world is I think the decline in the need for software as a service. I think the platforms itself, I think they should be very, very worried. I think the big firms that have locked big projects in big contracts and not provide much value, they should be very, very worried, because there are people like myself out there and innovators who are looking to disrupt the market. And it would just be great for the clients because they'll have these options now and they won't be locked into these dinosaurs that have really run the industry for the last 50 years.
Great insights, Well. And thank you so much for joining our pod and sharing your insight. Even want to remind my audience as well that if you need anything about project management, please listen to Val Matthews, the Chatter podcast, and follow him on LinkedIn. Val Matthews. Thank you, Val.
Thank you. Good to see you.
I believe everyone listening to this podcast has got something to take away from today's discussion. If you like this podcast, Please listen, follow, and share this podcast within your network. If you believe we should be sharing your story or someone within your network, there is a railway leader who should be here sharing his or her contribution to this industry. Contact me on railway transportation systems at gmail.com. Thank you for your time today. Stay safe and take care of yourself.